Welcome to the Leadership Society Speaker Series. The theme this year is Tensions, Business, Civic Society, and Politics. I'm Brian Lowry, Professor of Organizational Behavior at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and today I'm speaking with Thomas Edsall. And Thomas is a New York Times columnist and the author of multiple books, most recently, The Point of No Return, America, Democracy at the Crossroads. He's also an adjunct senior research scholar in the Faculty of Journalism at Columbia School of Journalism, and he wrote for the Washington Post for over 25 years. Thanks so much for visiting us, Thomas.
It's my pleasure. I'm honored to be here.
Fantastic. So many of your columns focus on political polarization and often specifically on affective polarization. Can you describe what that is and why it's so important?
Well, polarization really began in the mid-'60s, and it was over issues. So the Civil Rights Revolution was crucial to polarization and the divide between conservative whites and liberals, black, white, and of all races. And the women's rights movement came along, the gay rights movement. All that, those were ideological differences or differences on specific matters. What's happened more recently is that polarization has become so embedded in people that it's become part of their identity. They see themselves as their values. If they're a Democrat, they see their values wrapped up in being a Democrat, their way of life, and they see Republicans as an enemy to that. The same is true in the opposite side of the coin, where Republicans see Democrats in this very hostile fashion. This is what's called affective polarization, where it's an emotional response to one's own party, if very favorable, and a hostile response to the other party. This has become now endemic in America, and the number of people who lose sleep over the prospect that the other guys are going to win has now become a commonplace almost. And this fear of losing and what's going to be taken away from you if you lose, that drives things. And it's much less ideological and much more a matter of emotion and feeling. So that's the affective part, A-F-F-E-C-T-I, whatever it is. Anyway, that's the difference now.
I see. And how does this shift from kind of focus on policies and approach to politics and moving more towards identity and emotion? How does that affect politics?
Well, it makes politics very, very hard to ever reach agreement. If the other side is an enemy opposed to what you believe in, and I mean, Tom DeLay, who used to be the majority leader in the House when it was Republican controlled, saw the Democrats as basically people willing to kill babies, for example, on abortion. To be associated with them with the other side was fatal. Charlie Crist was the governor of Florida. They had a hurricane there, and President Obama came down to provide aid, announced that there was going to be a federal aid program, and the two went arm in arm. That arm in arm photograph of Charlie Crist and Barack Obama became a key issue in the campaign, and Charlie Crist ran for Senate, and he lost to Marco Rubio, in part because he had been too cooperative. And that's where it really changes the character of politics. You can't make a deal. If the deal is with the enemy, if the deal is with the devil, rather, then you really are in a situation where making a deal becomes just plain impossible.
Mm-hmm. And so that explains its effect in politics, but it also seems to play a role in civic life. So can you say a little bit about that? What's the consequence of this effective polarization for the way people live, the average person lives?
Well, more and more people, for example, are when people move, they now choose to move to areas that are of their own political party. If you're a Democrat and say you're moving to Austin, Texas, you want to move to a street where they have a lot of those sort of nice flags out, LBGT flags, bumper stickers. And if you're a Republican moving to Austin, you want to move to a neighborhood where there's a lot of pickup trucks with a shotgun rack in the back and a boat in the front yard. People are separating geographically and how and where they live. And even churches are now separate almost. You have a whole universe of Christian right churches that are basically Republican, Trump-oriented institutions. So you have this division sort of spreading throughout the whole system. You see this on television, where this is one of the reasons why conservatives are so worried. They see television is now basically captured by the left, and they see most television shows was holding liberal values, supporting gay marriage, supporting trans kids, supporting a much more integrated world, and they find this very threatening when they see the culture itself as having been taken over by the left. And it's one of the prime motivators on the right, where they want to recapture the culture. And so you have basically I could go on and on. I will, I guess, further.
So, I find this interesting because it seems to me that this shouldn't be new. People have always wanted to be around people like them. What's changed? What's new about what's going on now?
Well, what's changed really is there are fewer and fewer people with cross-cutting views. There are almost, if you're a Democrat now, the chances are you are pro-choice, you're pro-gay marriage. You basically, Democrats and Republicans, excuse me, have become increasingly consistent in their point of view. It used to be, when I first came to Washington, there were a lot of anti-abortion Democrats. There were a lot of Catholic Democrats who opposed abortion. They would be liberal on social spending, and they would be a liberal on regulation, but on some issues they were on the right. You don't have those kind of cross-cutting things, so there's very little. If you look at the members of the House it used to be that there were a lot of conservative Democrats who were more conservative than liberal Republicans. And there were liberal Republicans who were deep into or more conservative than many of their colleagues. You saw an overlap between the two parties. That overlap no longer exists. The problem is that this is also taking place in the culture at large, in the world at large. And you don't get this sense of people being able to have a mixed point of view. They are either down the line liberals or down the line conservatives. It's not true with everybody, but it's increasingly the pattern where what's called issue consistency, where it has become more and more the characteristic, especially among people who are even slightly politically active. And so it basically intensifies the divide. And so, of course, you want to live with people who are similar to you, have similar values, and like the same movies, and you have something in common to talk about. But the problem is now there's no tension or conflict in that. It's kind of like everything has become either a strawberry milkshake or a chocolate milkshake. There's no mix.
And what accounts for that? I mean, if it's new, what's changed? I mean, it seems like we'd be moving to that in any case. What do you think is driving that shift?
Well, it really was political elites did this. A lot of this starts at the very top, where members of Congress, the party leaders, the groups that support each party. It used to be, for example, you take the Republican Party, it was as strong for women's rights at the beginning of the women's rights movement as the Democratic Party was. And the votes on the Equal Rights Amendment had tons of Republican supporters in the House and the Senate. Over time, the abortion issue arose, and that mobilized a lot of anti-abortion forces on the right. And then that overlapped with anti-feminist organizations on the right. Phyllis Schlafly started her group, the Moral Majority, and these constituencies on the right pushed their leadership away, and you can see this in the Republican Party platform. They abandoned support for the Equal Rights Amendment somewhere around in the late 1970s in their platforms. And what you have is the parties at the top separating, and that filters down slowly to political activists, then more and more to actual voters. And people divide in this top-down, sort of slowly evolving process. And it then coincides where people put their identity into their partisanship. When that happens, they're under a lot. If you identify strongly as a Democrat or as a Republican, you're under strong pressure now to adopt what are now conservative Republican positions or liberal Democratic positions. And that pushes people farther apart again and again. So it's a network of forces that are at work.
Yeah, you know, when I hear these arguments about it's the elites, right? So it's in this case, the political elites driving the change. Maybe this is a cynical view, but I think of political elites as somewhat opportunistic. So they're looking at the population and saying, how am I more likely to win this election? How can I get a constituency that will vote for me? So I'm wondering what changed or what was going on in the general public that made them susceptible to these kind of shifts in the political elite that you're describing.
One is that a lot of these issues touch deeply emotional feelings. Abortion really captures, if you're a pro-choice woman, you believe that abortion is something that's essential to the freedom of women to be able to compete on an equal playing field with men in the world at large. If you're a anti-choice Republican, you believe that abortion is murder. These are two diametrically opposed views. They're deeply held, but diametrically opposed views. These issues, these kinds of issues, have become increasingly salient. If you believe in gay rights and gay marriage, you believe that it's legitimate for a couple who are gay to get married, and that should be their right. If you are a Bible-believing evangelical Christian, you believe that marriage is meant to be by God. I mean, by God made marriage in order to unite men and women, not to unite men and men or women and women. These are views that really separate people. These culture war issues, which are not issues that you can compromise on very easily, did not exist before 1965. And it was from the mid-60s on that these issues became increasingly salient in people's decisions about the two parties. And people began to, first elites, as I would argue, but people began to see the two parties in terms of these issues. The biggest issue was the first one, which was the civil rights movement. Before 1964, voters did not view the Democratic Party or the Republican Party as either the liberal racial party or the conservative racial party. In 1964, we had an election pitting Lyndon Johnson, who was the sponsor of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, against Barry Goldwater, who was the leading Republican opponent of the Civil Rights Act. After that, voters literally began to see the Democratic Party as the liberal party on race and the Republican Party as the conservative party on race. This had not existed before, but the same process takes place, different evolution, but same process though, on gay rights, on women's rights, on trans rights. All of these issues begin to divide these ways. And these are issues that if you have the old issues were of taxing and spending and regulation. On those issues, you could compromise. You could say, okay, you want to give middle-class people some money and you want to be nice to rich people. You can do both, give a tax cut to both, or you can, cut it any way you want. And you can make a deal. The same was true with regulation. You can regulate some, but not all, whatever the case is going to be. In the case of these culture war issues, they are either or. You don't have a middle ground or a negotiating position. People who are opposed to gay marriage don't want a little bit of gay marriage. They don't want any gay marriage. People who are for gay marriage want gay marriage, and they want it for everyone who wants to get married who's gay. They're not, it's a different kind of issue context that has now taken over American politics. Not taken it over, the tax and spend stuff is still there, but it's the evolutions over the past really 5 decades has changed the kind of issues that are really important to people. And the ones that are really important, and you see this like the Dobbs decision was a powerful force helping Democrats survive the 2022 election. In rural areas, all these cultural issues are very important to people where they feel their traditional culture is under attack by the left. So you see them splitting off on basically every one of these culture war issues. And the battleground is in the suburbs where there is still some division, although as the suburbs expand out, they become more and more democratic. And
one of the things that makes me think about is the conversations around academia, actually. So there's a lot of conversations about the liberal position of many academic institutions or the wokeness on campuses. Do you think there's the possibility of a truly neutral entity like, or institution like academic institutions? Is that possible in the current environment? How do you think about that?
Well, the reality is that in almost all universities, including your own, but where I taught at Columbia, the faculties of almost all subjects, except slightly less so in economics and a few other areas, but even in most sciences, the faculty is very liberal and very democratic, overwhelmingly. That has been a growing phenomenon. I don't see it stopping. And that it's somewhat self-reinforcing that a very liberal faculty, there will be committees that decide who to hire, who to promote, who to whatever. And it's going to be a clear tilt in favor of liberals in that whole process, so that the process basically intensifies. I think it's a problem. When I was teaching at Columbia, which I did for 8 years, I was always happy if I had at least one kid who was a conservative, so that the other kids in their class who had never met a conservative in their life would realize that they're human beings too. And but a lot of years there were no conservatives whatsoever, even in the class. The student body and the faculty, they're overwhelmingly liberal. And that's part of this divide where academia has become a place where liberals are the most comfortable and they seek it out, and conservatives are uncomfortable. They feel like alien forces. So they're not going to even try to go into that field. And I don't know what's going to happen there. It's an interesting question. But
yeah, let me pivot a little bit and talk about economics a little bit more. So you state from roughly 1968 to the present, policymaking has been driven by the top quintile of the income distribution and by corporate America. So, what role do you think that's played in the increasing polarization we see?
I think the elite control of the Republican Party up before 2016 was a major factor in the creation of Donald Trump and the emergence of a right-wing populist party. Before 2016, the Republican Party had always been dominated in who it would pick for presidential nominees by its own establishment. The business leaders, the lobbyists, the party leaders, they would basically get together and they would decide, and almost always the person they would pick would be the next one in line, whoever had come in second in the previous set of primaries. That was true with Bob Dole, it was true with Mitt Romney, it was true with John McCain. There was this always that they would crown their princes. Donald Trump came along and he disrupted that whole process by challenging that corporate elite. The corporate elite, in contrast to a lot of the Republican Party voters, the corporate elite supported immigration and supported trade. That was not what the white working class voters who had become crucially important to the Republican Party, that was not what they wanted. So in a sense, Donald Trump democratized the Republican Party. He gave power to this voting majority, and they backed him to the hilt in the Republican primaries against some pretty powerful and prominent Republicans, particularly Jeb Bush, who was running in 2016, who just got wiped out. Even Ted Cruz, who's kind of a half establishment, half radical from Texas, he got wiped out. So you have in the Republican Party sort of an insurgency against that old elite. The Democratic Party has increasingly become dominated by well-educated white voters. It has a substantial minority population, and that's important part of the electorate, and that's crucial to elections. But where they have gained, and the growth area in the Democratic Party has been among college-educated and more than college-educated white voters. Those voters are not, how do I put this? They are not scared of globalization. They like globalization. They like foreign trade. They are like out of Silicon Valley. They can compete. They are equipped with the knowledge training that they have to get along in what is in an economy that increasingly demands a college degree. They have the degrees. It's made for a different kind of Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party, in many ways now, is the party of the elite, the party of the winners. And the Republican Party, to some extent, is now the party of losers and of the non-elite. I wouldn't call them an insurgency, but they still, it used to be the Democratic Party was the party of the working class. The Jill and Joe six-pack were the Democrats. That's no longer the case. The Democratic Party cannot claim that. That makes for a very different kind of politics, and it has changed the nature of what campaigns and elections are all about.
So given that, where did the corporate elite go? What's their party now? So you feel like they've been kind of pushed out a little bit. If I
they have, right. If you notice, you're seeing a lot of the corporate elite now calling for Nikki Haley to run against Trump. I think they see her as their sort of as a last gap to getting back control of the Republican Party. And you see the whole Koch empire now, which is basically a business empire, a free market business empire, also has explicitly endorsed Nikki Haley. So that there is that tension. Conversely, though, Trump did not really damaged the corporate elite. His tax bill that he passed was very favorable to corporate America. His problem areas are that he's unreliable, which business really hates because they like a reliable, consistent set of policies. And he's anti-trade, which they don't like. And he is really anti-immigrant. And business has a strong interest in maintaining a substantial amount of immigration for its own workforce.
So there's a possibility, given what you're saying, that maybe the corporate elite could play a moderating force. Is that aligned with what you're saying?
Well, I'm not sure that they're able. Well, they might if they were able to engineer a Nikki Haley victory. That would certainly would moderate the Republican Party compared to Donald Trump. I'm not sure that they could pull that off. The more what they've done, the corporate America now has during the Reagan, when conservatism was really on the rise, corporate America's shifted pretty sharply in terms of who it supported and gave campaign contributions to Republicans. They liked the free market policies of the Reagan administration and conservatives. That's changing somewhat, and certainly high tech has a lot of Democrats basically in it. So business has become split, and it's no longer a reliably Republican area. Where the Republican areas are the fossil fuel area, the oil and gas industries, along with the highly regulated companies which don't want to control or limit regulation, like pharma, drug companies, others. They are the mainstays of the Republican Party, but there's been, as I say, some split. And if you look at campaign contributions by industry, they vary quite widely now.
You know, the other thing that makes, when you talk about the corporate America, there's been a huge increase in inequality in the United States over the last, I don't know, call it 40 or 50 years. And I wonder what role you think corporate America has played in that, and is that a part of the opening for Donald Trump? Did that create an opening for Donald Trump? I wonder what you think about that.
I think it's created a huge opening for Trump. He has done his best in the communities that have been hit worst by global trade. If you look at the rise of China as basically goods, there's been a lot of very detailed studies of them in the Midwest, of those communities where the opening of trade through the World Trade Organization, WTO, those congressional districts that had manufacturing before the WTO opened up to China and lost manufacturing as China was given equal status to all nations, then those are the areas that shifted sharply to the right. And those are the areas why Trump won in 2016 in Michigan, in Ohio, that whole Midwest belt that had, and Iowa that had been Democratic or Democratic leaning, shifted in large part because of the effect of global trade, which is what big business is all about.
And so, you know, this is kind of going back a bit. I think that's bipartisan in terms of, for example, the Democratic Party supported NAFTA, which also led to, in some sense, is my understanding at least, reduction in manufacturing jobs in the United States. Is what's going on now a revolt not just against the Republican Party, but against political elites as a whole?
How would you vote?
I mean, you vote Republican, but in reality, like you're voting Trump, you're voting Trumpian, and so it's you're like pushed against the traditional Republican Party, and you're anti Democrat. Is that really what's going on right now? So you could
that's a large part. It's not the only thing that's going on, but that is a very substantial part of what's going on, I would say. There are a lot of Trump voters when they're asked, are you supporting Trump because he's Trump, or are you supporting the Republican candidate because you believe the Republican Party? I think a majority of them say they're supporting Trump as opposed to supporting the Republican Party. He has this huge constituency that identifies with him to a degree and a depth that is almost unprecedented in American politics. Maybe you go back to Franklin Roosevelt. There were a lot of people who felt that strongly about a president. And I guess there were a fair number of people who felt strongly about Ronald Reagan. But Trump is really, he's certainly more than Ronald Reagan. And I don't know how he would compare to Franklin Roosevelt.
And your new book is titled The Point of No Return. Do you believe we're at the point of no return?
Well, it's always a question of whether this division in America, it hasn't gotten any better and it keeps getting worse. And how much division can a democracy tolerate? When you have a democracy, ultimately depends on the ability of government to reach decisions and to be able to make policy and to address the problems that are facing the nation. If you have polarization, it's increasingly difficult to reach a decision. Neither side wants to cooperate with the other. Neither side wants to give an inch in terms of the process of negotiating. That then prevents democracy from functioning. And at a certain point, and then you have Trump denying the election results, and a majority of Republicans now believe he was right in saying that the election was stolen. You have a majority of one major political party agreeing that an election was stolen, and you have more and more Republicans basically arguing that those who have been charged in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, that they were charged illegitimately, or that Antifa was behind it, or that or FBI plants. You have a growing constituency believing that the FBI and the Department of Justice are agents of liberalism in the Democratic Party. That's we're getting to a kind of outer space area in terms of lowercase democratic governance. Now, whether that's a breaking point, I don't know, but there are some who argue that the Republican Party has gone so far that it can't come back. There's some, I don't know. And a lot will depend on this coming election. If Trump gets defeated decisively, that would be a healthy step towards getting back towards at least a semblance of norm. What's really weird is that the goal of a political party in a democracy is to win, and the Republican Party is increasingly fearful that it cannot win in a level playing field, and it is doing a lot to try to make the playing field tilted in their favor through voter laws, through the control of the election bureaucracies, a lot of steps that they hope will tilt it in their favor and allow them to win, even if they don't cast the majority. They already have an edge, a pre-given edge in the Electoral College, and in the House races they have an edge in the way political districts district lines are drawn. So they have some built-in advantages. They want to build in more advantages. But a party, you can't have a democratic system where a party is increasingly dependent on corrupting the system. To some extent, that's what's happening.
And putting parties aside, this is kind of my final question. A number of our fellow citizens will, if Trump is the nominee, will vote for Trump. And even if he loses decisively, there'll be a significant portion of the population that will support him. what are the routes to a healthy democracy if you have a significant number of people, and as you, not all of the people who vote for Trump, but let's assume many of them will be concerned about the legitimacy of an election if Trump doesn't win. The people who voted for him in the last election, many of them, as you just stated, are concerned or don't believe that the previous election was legitimate. How do you have a functioning democracy when you have a significant part of the population that believes that? What's the route to reconciliation or to healthy living together in a civic society?
I wish I had the answer to that. I think you're posing the right question. But that's whoever has the answer to that is going to make a lot of money or is going to be a very famous person. There have been a lot of attempts to figure out ways to try to bring reality back into focus, and a lot of experimental stuff it's all very tentative, and most of it does not really work, and most of it could never be applied to the population at large. The small experimental things. It could be that we should shift to proportional representation. That's one argument. And there should be more encouragement so that people have more choice in their voting, and they're not limited to two parties. If you had 4 or 5 parties running, and if, say, states allocated congressional districts proportionally, not so that a third party would have a chance of winning 1 or 2 House seats in a state like Arizona, that might diffuse some of that argument. That's an experiment. It's an experiment, though, and there are proportional representation states. Israel is one of them, where it hasn't really done much to quiet conflict. Other places, a lot of Europe has proportional representation and has had less polarization than us. The polarization is accelerating more in the United States than in any other nation. But I'm not sure what kind of reforms really can be done. I'm basically a pessimist.